All right. Hopefully everyone can see me, can hear me. We are attempting to still set up here. So again, bear with us as we get this thing cracking the way we need to. Let's see here. Okay. Like I mentioned before, we're building this as we fly it. So I'm going to ask for your indulgence and your help on some level here. Let's see. Okay. Well, as we get ourselves started here, we're going to talk a little bit about midterms today and what that actually means in terms of this election and what it means in terms of what it means for the country. Yeah. All right. Just going to make this a little bit smaller because we don't need this right now. All right. So, welcome to Curious Formula, and welcome. I am your host, Curious Formula, and we're here to talk about the 2022 midterms and what that means for the nation and what it means for our country in this incredibly traumatic 2022 season. So for those of you who are the uninitiated, don't know much about midterm elections, don't know much about what that means in terms of, you see all the campaign ads, I'm sure, in your states and your respective communities, and you're wondering, like, what does that really mean? And what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my community ultimately? So midterm elections happen in the middle of every presidential term. It's 2 years in, and it's the House of Representatives, which is up every 2 years, and senators who are up every 6 years, but it's staggered 2 years, 2 years, 2 years throughout the entire Senate. So every 2 years there is a Senate election, not of the entire Senate, but of portions of the Senate. I believe it's a third of the Senate that goes up every 2 years, but the House goes up every 2 years. Every member has to stand in the House. And most times, with 2 weeks left to go, most times you will see the mainstream media always try to talk about horse races, right? That we can't tell which way is up, and polls are tight, and we don't know who's going to win any of these races. And but that's to keep you engaged. The reality is that we all pretty much who are the initiated in this business know what's going to happen. We know where trends are going. We know like who is probably apt to win some of these seats, who's probably going to lose. But the horse racing keeps you, clicking, keeps you subscribing, keeps you watching, keeps you doing what you need to do. So I'm going to ask that you do the same here. You subscribe to Curious_Formula, that you like the video, and we're going to get going forward. So I always start this off by saying, don't believe the hype. That's what they want you to do. My prediction, the Republicans are going to take the House, and the Democrats are going to expand their control in the Senate by one. And I'll tell you some of the reasons why. So, as I mentioned about midterms every 2 years it happens for the entire House of Representatives, and a third of the Senate goes up. But I would tell you that whatever party is in the White House, the opposition party always gains seats. That has happened since the beginning of the Republic, 1789 midterm for George Washington. And he won the damn war to make us a country. He lost seats, right? The Federalist Party lost seats to what they called then the Democratic Republican Party. Long story if we want a history lesson. But there may have been 5 times in the entire history of the Republic where that has not been true, where where the party has not lost, the opposition party has not gained seats in the midterms. We all remember Barack Obama had big margins in the House and the Senate when he became president, and in 2010 he got slaughtered and took both houses away from him. That's what happens. I think initially in the summertime, Democrats thought they really had a good shot to keep the House and the Senate, and they were leading in gubernatorial races across the country, mainly because they were riding high on the Inflation Reduction Act, showed that Congress, Democratic Congress and Democratic president could actually get some really monumental legislation passed. So why not keep us all in office, right? So we can keep doing this for you guys. Then I think you also had the Dobbs decision that came down from the Supreme Court about that abolished Roe versus Wade, that there was going to be an influx of women hitting the ballot boxes in record numbers and voting Democratic, specifically to stop further encroachment on a woman's right to choose. Indeed, Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, promised that if the Republicans gained control of the Senate, that he had a bill on the floor that was going to basically strip those rights even further in the states at the federal level. So that states, you couldn't have states that would have one law that says, yeah, you can have abortions here, and other states that do not. So people are now driving. He wants to have a vote on a national federal law that would forbid that and follow the edicts, if you will, of the Dobbs decision. But as the summer left and came into fall, those numbers actually got smaller, and so I still think a lot of women will be voting Democratic in the general election. I do believe Dobbs' decision will have some effect. It's just not going to be enough, and I don't see the normal cycle breaking for Democrats this time out. I see the natural proclivities of the electorate are starting to go back, and you're starting to see races really get decided that I think they thought they had issues that we thought may have been fluid are no longer fluid. So let's look at a couple of these races real quickly. In Georgia's the big race. I see the Democrats holding that seat. I think Raphael Warnock has really, I think he keeps that seat Democratic by the same margin he won it by 2 years ago. He's filling the unexpired term, so that's why he had to run again after 2 years. And if he wins this time, it'll be for the full 6 years. I think Herschel Walker has been a disastrous candidate, and really has played to the caricature that people have of African American men. All the negative sort of stereotypes. I think he plays into those tropes, and it's really unfortunate. But I think Warnock wins that by 2. Interestingly enough, I think if you look at the gubernatorial race, I actually think that Stacey Abrams loses that governor's race to Governor Kemp, but I think it's just shameful considering what she has done to revitalize the Democratic Party in Georgia. There is no Senator Ossoff victory. There is no Senator Warnock victory, and there damn sure is no President Biden win 2 years ago had it not been for the work that Stacey Abrams does. And I think not only did she lose that race, but she loses it at a larger number than she lost 4 years ago, which, again, like I said, is a real shame. I think when you look at Pennsylvania is another big state. We have Fetterman versus Dr. Oz. And, Fetterman was really wiping the floor up with Dr. Oz in the summertime, way ahead, money, polling, the wind beneath his sails. And then we started having questions about his physical ability to actually serve in the job. And I think the interview he did on the Today Show, while I consider him to be very courageous in coming out and talking about what he's been battling after his stroke. It takes a real strong man and woman to really come back out after that and really try to fight to be a public servant. I think it's courageous. It's heroic. But there were obvious physical disabilities that he has, and I think there's a real question in Pennsylvania as to whether he can serve. And I think they provided an opening for Dr. Oz to come back into this race and actually make it a race. Everyone knows how Pennsylvania is. We have a saying in the political realm that Pennsylvania is Alabama, except for Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, right? So everything in between and on the sides of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh is basically Alabama. And if you've ever been to Pennsylvania, you know that's the way the politics is there. Those metropolitan centers and the suburbs around them is the Democratic vote. The rest of it is you might as well be in Mississippi. And so That race is tightened up. I still think John Fetterman wins that seat, and that's a pickup for the Democrats. So that's the one seat that's the pickup, which is getting to me to my 51 number for them. The other race, I think, is Ohio, where you have Congressman Ryan running against J.D. Vance. Some of you have seen the videos or outtakes of that debate, some of the debates that they've had where Ryan's really mopped the floor up with J.D. Vance in a lot of ways. And while he is still polling behind J.D. Vance, the Republican, in Ohio, the Buckeye state is a very conservative state. It used to be a swing state, used to be a purple state where it was pretty competitive. It is a red state now. But I think, except for Sherrod Brown being the last remaining sort of liberal, winning liberal statewide in that state, I still think Ryan will pull that out. I think turnout will be where it needs to be, and there are enough Republicans who I think may sit home on J.D. Vance because he is a Trump-endorsed supporter. Even though Trump won Ohio, I think there is some buyer's remorse happening in that state that I think is going to benefit Congressman Ryan. I think we'll be calling him senator next year. I think that represents the second Democrat pickup in that particular state. Some of the states that I think are underperforming, the Democrats are underperforming in, are in Wisconsin, where I think Ron Johnson, the current Republican senator, is going to beat Mandela Barnes. Mandela Barnes is a very attractive candidate, raised a lot of money, continues to raise a lot of money. Lieutenant governor of that state, African American, and I think people thought he would bring a real sledgehammer to this race. And oddly enough, Senator Ron Johnson, who was seen as a very mainstream conservative, who got magatized, for lack of a better term. I think and people thought he was dead to rights about a year ago, even 2 years ago, has now seen new life. And I think he is actually starting to expand his lead there. And so I think that will be a Republican hold. Some of the other competitive states, and I'll say the last one, which I think will get us to 51, because right now, if there's a Wisconsin pick, if there's a Ohio pickup, and there is a pickup in Pennsylvania, those are two positions that get us back to 50. And I'll tell you what my 51 is after I go through some of these other races. There was talk about in Iowa that Senator Chuck Grassley was in trouble because there was one outlier poll that showed him only 3 points ahead of Mike Franken. They were Democrat in that state. Don't forget, Iowa is a Republican state, but it does have Democratic leanings. They do elect Democrats there. The longest serving senator, Tom Harkin, was every bit of a liberal as Sherrod Brown is from Ohio, and he was a long-standing institution in that state. And so you used to have Grassley there's a Republican conservative, and you had Tom Harkin, a liberal Democrat, who won races quite easily in that state. So there is room for that. And Chuck Grassley has been polling really low for the last year or so, as people feel like he has been magnetized, if you will, and sort of falling under the trance of Trump. And so there was one poll that showed he was only 3 points ahead of Mike Franken, the Democrat. I don't believe that poll. I think that's an outlier. I still think Chuck Grassley holds on to that seat. I think he wins it by double digits. So that would represent a Republican hold in Iowa. In Utah, you have Senator Mike Lee against McMullen, who is running as an independent. And again, I think McMullen is a really good candidate. I think, Utahns, I don't know how to correctly pronounce what you call a person who lives in Utah, but Utahns really like independent leadership. They kind of value it. It goes back to sort of how that state was founded. And McMullen is giving him at least a fight in terms of the rhetoric and the like. But I think it's more smoke than mirrors. I think the Republican Party is strong enough in Utah that, especially a Democrat, really can't win statewide there. And I think an independent has a better chance. But I still see Mike Lee winning that seat, even without the support of Mitt Romney, which he has been begging for on Fox News every chance he gets. The race in North Carolina, while again, mainstream media keeps saying this is going to be a big race between Sherry Beasley and Mr. Budd, I don't see it maintaining that way. Numbers show that Budd that's going to stay Republican, and so I think Beasley, despite having raised a lot of money, and it's mostly outside money, I still think loses that race. I think that race stays. That seat stays Republican. In New Hampshire, former governor and current senator Maggie Hassan won the lottery by getting her a Trump supporter endorsed candidate to win the Republican nomination, and Mr. Baldock. And in a state like New Hampshire, known for its moderate politics, that doesn't sit well. And so she has been had a ground game that's been going for a year and a half in that state. I think she wins that seat, I think, comfortably by about 6 to 8 points. So the New Hampshire seat stays Democrat. I think in Colorado, where, people thought that Senator Bennett might have a challenge with Mr. O'Day, who happens to be a pro-choice Republican in that very purple state. I don't think his campaign has gotten any traction. Senator Bennett has been a good candidate, has been an even better senator, and I think he wins that seat. It keeps that seat blue, so I think it's a Democrat hole. I think he wins between 6 and 8 points in that particular race. And I think in Washington State, you have Senator Patty Murray against Miss Smiley. And while that race had trended to be a little closer, I still think the latest polls I show so that Senator Murray is about 8 to 10 points ahead. I think that stays that way. I think Washington State is not Trump country. It's not conservative. It's definitely not Republican. I think that she has governed in a way that would make most moderate and independents very happy and centrist in that state with some progressive leanings. So I think she wins comfortably, and that state stays Washington, stays Democrat. So how do we get to 51 for Democrats? I think it all goes down to Nevada. And Nevada is a state where current senator and first Latina senator in that state, Cortez Masto, is the incumbent running against the son of a legend, and Adam Laxalt. Some of you who are real political heads will remember that Adam Laxalt's father is the legendary Paul Laxalt, former U.S. senator from Nevada. He was one of the Republicans who was so conservative. He came in with Reagan in the 1980 sweep when Ronald Reagan basically won every state in the country except for 2 in a landslide victory. But that election in 1980, he brought a bunch of folks to the Senate that got senatorial Republican control of the Senate. But these were staunch conservative Republicans. The Republican Party at one time, you all probably don't remember this, now I'm showing my age, was actually a party that actually had liberal Republicans, you had moderate Republicans, you had conservative Republicans. Conservative Republicans were the minority until Barry Goldwater ran and won the nomination in 1964. And Ronald Reagan was ultimately the guy who was his biggest supporter. And it launched Ronald Reagan's sort of political career in the Republican Party. So when he comes to power and becomes president in 1980, he ushered in a whole swath of new conservative Republicans, basically ending a moderate and liberal wings of the Republican Party, not decimating them, like eliminating them, obliterating them. So not everybody in the Republican Party considers himself a conservative. That's just sort of the mainstream go-to position. So it's a matter of how much of a conservative you actually are. So Adam Laxalt comes from that family, and he has gone even more to the right. That race is tied. And so Democrats love to talk about turnout, that they win elections, this election is going to come to turnout. If they are going to prove, their strength, if there ever was a time where that needed to be true, it's going to be in Nevada. Because if Democrats can have a big turnout, they win. If they don't, they lose. That race is that close. I don't know how to call that. Obviously, if I'm predicting that the Democrats will not only keep control of Congress, but increase it by 1, I do think that Cortez Masto will pull it out. Simply because Adam Laxalt is not like his father. His father was a mainstream conservative. And Adam Laxalt is a Trump MAGA-tized Republican. And I don't think Nevada is that state anymore. I think it's more name recognition, the fact that lots of money has gone in there, and it's not quite crossed that line. Nevada is the ultimate poster child for a purple state. Look no further than Steve Horsford, who's a congressman from Las Vegas, who's in a tough race, and I think he wins that race too, as does Susie Lee, another congressperson who's Democrat. I think she wins her race. But I think Steve Horsford would be considered a progressive Democrat, won that seat years ago, lost in his reelection bid to a conservative Republican, Crescent Hardy. He chose not to run, but after 2 years after that, Crescent Hardy loses to another Democrat. Then that Democrat leaves, and then Steve Horsford runs for his old seat again and wins. And now he's in a top fight again with the conservative Republican. So it must be Las Vegas. What goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas, and maybe that means their politics too, because that's just very weird to have a progressive Democrat be locked into a tight fight with a conservative Republican. It doesn't happen many places across America. So that's how we get to 51 going forward. A couple of things I want to mention about some governor's races. I think the Sisolak race and Lombardo race in Nevada also fits the bill of a tight race and will be decided by turnout. That race is dead even as well. And so I think in the same way Cortez Masto needs a big turnout, so does Mr. Sisolak if he wants to be the Democratic gubernatorial candidate. It's all about turnout. I want to mention Arizona. Arizona is an odd state. You have a candidate running for governor there, and Christy Lake against Ms. Hobbs. Ms. Hobbs is the Democratic Secretary of State who had to certify the Arizona election results from 2020 that Ms. Lake says were, was bad, right? And so you have a real sort of big lie race here, right? The validity of whether the big lie is real in Arizona, whether it's not. They're already making Christy Lake to be like the next Sarah Palin in Republican national talk. If she wins that race, she becomes an instant overnight star, and I think will be on the short list for anybody who gets the nomination for VP. She's telegenic and she speaks well on the stump, and again, she believes a lot of the conspiratorial things that comes out of Trump's mouth and his supporters' mouth. Indeed, when she was locked in a very tight race for the Republican nomination, like 3 days before the election, she was like, if I lose this race, it'll be because the race was stolen from me. And people were like, you have proof? And she's like, I'll tell you after election day. And of course she won, and of course there was no proof, right? Because she won. But if she had lost, she would have alleged that there was election fraud. And this is kind of like what the hole we're finding ourselves in now post-Trump, with anybody who loses a race will now just out that their election was stolen, like we're like now a banana boat republic or a third world nation that has dictators coming in and out. This is going to be seen as normal. And also in that race in Arizona, interestingly enough, even though that the Republican is in the lead there, it's almost like Georgia in reverse, and that the senator there, Senator Kelly, I think is not way ahead, but ahead of Mr. Masters, who's looking to unseat him. People know Senator Kelly as freshman senator from Arizona, who's married to Gabby Gifford, who was tragically shot, but luckily survived. But he did all kinds of really difficult rehabilitation. He's a former astronaut, and again started up the race very strongly in this seat and polling very well. And Blake Masters has kind of caught up because Arizona is another sort of purple state at this point. Used to be a very conservative Republican state, is now a very purple state. But I think Senator Kelly keeps his seat, so that place stays Democratic and stays blue. So that's how we get to 51 in the Senate. That's just a little bit about the gubernatorial races. But one other gubernatorial race that I want to mention, that not because it's competitive, because I think we talk about sort of where the next new stars are coming politically, who could be running for president, who could be running for vice president very shortly. I think you have to look at Wes Moore in Maryland. Wes Moore is an African-American male, served in the military, I think he went to West Point, was a Rhodes Scholar, ran a really successful national nonprofit philanthropic foundation, and talks about leaving no one behind. He served in Afghanistan. I think I mentioned that. And so he's a guy who I think fits the picture of a guy that could be on a short list as well for vice president if he does a really good job. Look, if you want to become governor of a state, you should pick Maryland, because Maryland has a lot of money in it. There has a lot of rich counties. You have city, you have rural areas, you have suburb, you have beaches, there's a lot to do here. It's very racially diverse. It's very economically diverse. You have some cities that need help, like Baltimore and other places, but not a lot of urban areas that need that. You have the largest and most successful majority black county in America, in Prince George's County. So just full of middle class black folk living there. And so it's a very cool state that you can do a lot of things program wise that can be models of what you could do on the national scale, to be modeled and demonstration wise in the state of Maryland. So I'm not just saying this because Wes Moore is an alpha, as I am, but he's also, I think, a future star within the Democratic Party, definitely on the short list for VP, particularly if it's a white male or a white female at the top of the ticket. If Biden is not running 24, but he would definitely be a candidate, I think, in 28 in some kind of capacity. So Wes Moore's the guy that I think is probably the most talented guy out of all these candidates that I've mentioned in the past here. So, in this pack. So, very quickly, why do I think the Democrats are going to lose the House, and why do I think that the Republicans, if they gain the House, are still going to have issues with governing? So the really quickly, top 5 reasons I think the Democrats are going to lose the House. One is it's the economy, right? So first of all, Bill Clinton always said it's the economy, stupid, right? You always have to recognize that the economy, first and foremost, is the reason why people vote or don't vote, or vote for you or vote against you, and that's still holding true. It's still the number one issue. The economy is still the number one issue, and it's hitting people in the pocketbooks. Hell, all of us know how it's hitting all of us individually. It's hitting the whole country that way. Second thing is the enthusiasm gap. As I mentioned before, the enthusiasm gap used to be pretty small, that Democrats and Republicans are maybe 3 percentage points difference about who was most enthusiastic. That has exploded in the last couple of weeks. I think it's going to keep getting wider. Republicans are more motivated to vote in this election and get out to the polls, and they have the juice. So I think that's the second reason why. The third reason why I think that the Democrats are going to lose the House is because we can't stay on message. Message discipline is everything. And so I always say that that Donald Trump can tell a lie and stand on it and get everybody to read on the same page. Democrats can't tell the truth and stand on it, right? So if Donald Trump can get a large swath of the American public to actually believe that there is voter fraud when there has been no documentation of it, no Secretary of State even hesitated to certify results from that election, there have been lawsuits after lawsuit after lawsuit thrown out, proof that Trump actually was trying to get fake electors to come to D.C. to vote for him. All this proof and all this lack of proof on his side, and you can get it because he keeps repeating it. So Trump can repeat a lie, and the Democrats can't repeat a truth because Democrats actually have real legislative successes, real accomplishments that they can point to that they've actually done over the last 2 years, that even if you haven't felt it yet in your pocket, and you probably won't until like 2024 when these things get implemented and actually become root and branch part of the federal government, change policies and things like that, you won't feel it. But you could at least repeat the truth over and over and over again to get people acclimated to what it is. But what are Democrats doing? The Progressive Caucus is out here like writing letters about the Ukraine, right? That they had to then bring back, which gave aid and comfort to Putin. We're still having progressives fight mainstream moderate Democrats within the party. As a former elected official, I always believe, look, half a loaf is better than no loaf at all. And what's been done legislatively in these last 2 years rivals. The only thing that has been a longer, a better, greater period of legislative accomplishment has been the Great Society in the 60s. And so, the grumbling, the fighting, the who's the corporatist Democrat, who's the real people Democrat, it's killing us at the root. The fourth reason I'll say our Democrats are losing are black men. Black men and Latino voters. Black men are not voting for the Democratic Party. In fact, they're running from the Democratic Party. Black women are the most loyal and voting bloc the Democratic Party has, but black men are not. And the Democratic Party does not address, and I'm a black man, so I should know, the Democratic Party does not address issues of concern to black men. They certainly do describe issues to black women. I think it does help that there's a vice president who's a black woman. But black men are leaving the Democratic Party. And it behooves us as Democrats to find out why. To start pushing policies and implement things and listening, first of all, but implementing things that we know are going to attract black men. And they're leaving in the same way that Hispanic men and women are leaving the Democratic Party. And this is with a xenophobic former president really casting aspersions about the worst of Mexican Americans and other Latino Americans. We saw what he did in Puerto Rico after tornadoes hit that island, and just this whole disrespect and speaking in tropes about people of color over these years. But they're leaving as well, and I think this election is going to show that more than anything else, black men, Latino voters are leaving the Democratic Party, the supposed party of working class and middle class folks, but seemingly cannot get out of their own way to speak to average Americans about the things that matter that don't live on either coast. they call the flyover states. And they're not addressing middle America. And that's where most voters actually live and raise their families. The last reason I think is, number 5, is the education voter. My organization and I work for this commission a poll with Harris poll we put out a few months ago to show that not only are parents angry about the fact that public schools were closed, even when the science said they could be open, because of powerful democratic interests, special interests of adults that trump children and what they actually needed. And now you see NAEP scores, the nation's national report card on education, showing severe learning loss and deficits in 4th grade and 8th grade students in their testing and the assessment that really came out, and that are going to take potentially decades to fix. So parents are really mad that the Democratic Party has not really put forward a real, first, the Democratic Party and its leaders, and including the president on some level, really bowed down to special interests and didn't really force the issue of opening schools, which what they saw as something that was, not a major issue. Last year in Virginia, the new governor, Governor Youngkin, won on parent outrage about what was happening in schools. CRT was part of it and some of the other stuff, but it was really about parents feeling like a lack of control over their kids' educations and their options that were available. And black and brown people poll constantly want more options, more public school options. They want more charter school. They want more ability to do these parent pods. They want homeschooling options. They want more options in magnet schools. They want more options even to community schools. They want more options. And they see the Democratic Party is not offering any kind of new idea or solutions to what their kids have experienced. And so a lot of them I don't necessarily think will vote Republican, but they'll just stay at home and not vote at all. Those are the 5 reasons I think Democrats are going to lose seats they probably could have won had they paid attention to some of these 5 things in ways, that were meaningful and authentic going forward. Now, why do I think Republicans potentially won't be able to govern if they win? One is they're still caught in the trance of Trump. They're still caught in the cult of personality. One of my favorite groups was Living Color from back in the 90s. I'm showing my age now. Hard rock band, all black, kick butt when it comes to rock and roll. Had a song called Cult of Personality, right? And that's what Donald Trump is. And the Republican Party has not come up with a real alternative of policies or new ideas because they're still stuck on Trump. And until Donald Trump and the cult of that personality leaves the party, you're not going to be able to see governing going on. You're not going to be able to see a Speaker McCarthy, if he becomes a speaker, be able to govern the MAGA caucus within the House, right? The MAGA caucus are the Trump, really hardcore Trump supporters, Congress people that are in the House of Representatives. They used to be the Tea Party, right, caucus, and then they morphed into the MAGA caucus. But former Speaker Paul Ryan had to resign, right, because he couldn't corral that group. Speaker Boehner had to resign because he couldn't corral that group. I don't know if McCarthy can do it either. If he can become Speaker, he has the votes, which leads me to believe. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think there's just no new ideas coming out of the Republican Party. We know what they're against, but what are they for? Besides the regular sort of textbook, which is corporate tax cuts. And I'm not here to talk about whether that's good or bad. I'm just trying to say that that's all they've been offering or talk about tax cuts. And that's just not, what we need when the debt is this high and deficits are this high because of the former Trump tax cuts that were given, right? They were not paid for. That's a problem when you cut corporate tax. The money just doesn't come into the coffers, and then deficits go up, debt goes up. So that being said, when all this happens, when the House becomes Republican, the Senate stays a Democrat, what does that mean in terms of what happens in the short term? Well, in the short term, the Republicans are going to have to pick a leader. Who's going to be the speaker, right? As I mentioned, McCarthy is going to have issues. Kevin McCarthy is a minority leader right now. He's trying to be the speaker if the Republicans can win. He should have the votes. But he gave an article, he spoke in an article last week that said, listen, I feel like I've done everything. I'm paraphrasing him. I feel like I've done everything to become speaker, get the votes to become speaker. But if I don't become speaker, that's God's will. Now, that sounds like a guy that does not have enough necessary votes yet. He probably can get the votes, but it means he doesn't have it yet. And it means it probably has to be a lot of compromises in order to get those votes to become speaker. But the other piece of this is that there might be a compromise candidate, right, that may come out of the shadows that we've not even thought of right now. A Steve Scalise maybe from Louisiana, someone else that both sides, the MAGAs on the traditional conservatives, can actually decide on. And then the question becomes, who's that leadership team made up of, right? Do people move up, like Elisa Stefanik and some others in there? That, the one who deposed Liz Cheney when she was part of the January 6th committee, that she move up in leadership from New York? There's some new faces in there. There's some African-American, Latino faces maybe getting into some leadership in the Republican Party. What kind of issues are they going to be fighting on? The first thing they're going to have to deal with is raising the debt ceiling, right? Something that used to be done in a bipartisan way, and was never much rancor between Democrats or Republicans, is now a line in the sand for Republicans. And so if McCarthy can't get a significant number of Republicans to support raising the debt ceiling, which leadership recognizes, even when they talk rhetorically, they don't want to do it, and they get in the office and they see the numbers and they see what happened if they don't do it, they all kind of get religion real quick and come to Jesus moment. They go, we got to raise it. When he can't get the Republicans to go, and he's going to have to find some kind of way to get tons of Democrats to support this, so he can get the vote. So what kind of compromises is he willing to do, or to get those votes? Likewise, on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats will also be looking about leadership, even though they will be in the minority. So Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Whip Jim Clyburn are in their 80s, and younger members are clamoring for leadership. And Pelosi did mention that she was sort of a caretaker at this point, a transition leader at this point. Does she decide, if she goes to the minority, to give up leadership, staying in the Congress, but giving up leadership so that she can let a new generation of leadership take in? Now, Hakeem Jeffries is fourth in the leadership team, which means he should, if all three of those folks who are in their 80s, octogenarians, decided to step down in terms of leadership, he should be the next speaker, or at least the next minority leader. And then the question becomes, who becomes his leadership team? I do know from the grapevine that day after Election Day, there are going to be a number of Democrats, and I suppose Republicans as well, but really on the Democrat side, looking to fight for leadership positions, looking to become ranking members on committees in the House and in the Senate, looking to head up caucuses. There are lots of caucuses in the House too: Progressive Caucus, Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Asian Pacific Islander Caucus. There's the Problem Solvers Caucus. There's the Future Caucus. There's New Dems. So there's a lot of caucuses out there that are going to be looking for leadership as well. And like I said, minority committee heads, and who wants to run the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, who wants to run the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee, who wants to run committee, who wants to run the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, who wants to run the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee. So it's going to be a lot of these kind of decisions that are going to be in-house and internal. You won't know anything about it. Stick with me. I'll tell you a little bit, as much as I can find out and know. But you're going to have those kind of fights as well. In the Senate, if the Democrats do expand by one, like I'm predicting, that sort of means that Manchin and Sinema have less ability to muck up the works, to throw a monkey wrench in any negotiations for stuff. But how does governing look, right, with a Democratic Senate and a Republican House? Does anything get done? Does President Biden, who's a moderate at heart, do what President Clinton did when he was faced with a Congress that was not of his party and still tasked with 2 years left to govern? He did something called triangulation, meaning that he went back to his sort of more conservative roots and passed the things that he couldn't pass when the Democrats were in the majority. He passed stuff that Republicans agreed with him on that he felt like would happen. So tax cuts and other things that started to happen, he got passed with Republicans. Does Biden take that route? Because it really worked out well for Bill Clinton, because he got reelected, because he actually got stuff done even when he didn't have a majority in Congress, and it ultimately led to Newt Gingrich losing his power as Speaker. So does Biden do the same thing? Does he, he's passed and got a lot of progressive things done, a lot of progressive priorities done. He's gotten a lot of liberal policies put into law. He's passed tons of legislation. Now does he kind of reel it back and pass the things that he wants to do incrementally that Republicans may support, because they are on record supporting it and need to come through and do those things. So it's going to be interesting as well going forward in terms of life right after the election. That's it for me tonight. We've gone for a long time, about 40 some odd minutes. Glad to see everybody. Please like and subscribe below. And we'll see you on tomorrow. The shorter, condensed version of this. We're going to go for 15 minutes tomorrow, but I wanted to give you an overall look at these elections. Please post questions, and I'll be glad to get back to you. Stay curious.